So,
Yeah.
good evening, everybody, and welcome in our living room for the Fireside chat with Donald Farmer today. So, welcome, Donald, to have you in our
Oh,
living
thank
room.
you.
So,
It's great to be in your living room.
thank you, thank you, thank you, and it's good to see you again. Usually we see each other every year at Connections. We try to meet
Absolutely.
short and briefly and have a chat. So I'm grateful that you are joining us here. And as I was discussing to prepare for this session with Boris, I started thinking about the analogy of how monkeys peel their bananas, and I couldn't remember it anymore. Can you please help me to remember it again?
How monkeys peel their bananas. Yeah, now
Yeah.
that's an interesting one. We first had that conversation, many years ago now, in Amsterdam, I think it was. And I used this example. But actually, it was part of a bigger story, if you remember. Because what I was trying to describe was how animals forage for food. And I was saying that if you have a monkey or in a tree or a squirrel in a tree, they don't eat every piece of fruit in the tree. The monkey doesn't eat every banana in the tree and then move on to the next tree. At some point, they decide that they've had enough bananas from one tree and it's too much effort to climb and get all the rest of them. It's easier to go to another tree where there's even more bananas. So they move on and they're very aware of the amount of energy that they're using to climb around. And at some point, they decide it's just easier to go to another tree. And I was comparing that to a field of study known as information foraging that had been developed by Peter Paroli in the USA, which studies the way in which we browse information, for example, on the web, or in the business intelligence world, if we're looking at dashboards and reports. At some point, we know we've got all the information or that's easy to get out of a report or a dashboard, and we don't dig into every final detail. We then move on to the next one. And so part of our work that we have to do is to enable that kind of foraging, that kind of exploration very easily. And then the other thing I always want to say when I'm talking about the monkeys in the tree example is, we can be very misled by our presumptions about things and our assumptions of how the world works. And as human beings, I watch people peeling bananas, and they nearly always, we break off the stalk and we peel them from that end. And if you watch monkeys, especially in zoos, if you get the opportunity to watch them peeling bananas, they do it from the other end. They hold the banana by the stalk and they peel it from the other end, which fits in nicely with the foraging example, because it means to me that not only do monkeys use information foraging techniques when they're looking for bananas, but once they get them, they use them in ways that are completely different from what we expect. And that's kind of surprising to me. So we need to build systems that enable our users to find information and to move on quickly to new sources of information and to get the clues that they need to find that new information. And when they get there, we have to expect them to behave in ways that we as experts, so-called experts, perhaps wouldn't do ourselves. So that's the point of the analogy. But the analogy is more fun than the story, I think.
That's the phrase was still there. How monkeys peel their
Exactly, yeah.
bananas.
I know every time
And
I
I
see you, we
knew
talk about bananas.
and I knew it was the other way around. So that's the way how I peel my banana. But the analogy
Right.
was somewhere hidden way back in my brain. But thank you that you brought it back to me again. I think it's a very good analogy. Do you think also, Boris?
Yeah, I think I like it. I like it a lot, especially the part about like I think it's far easier to peel the banana from the front end as well, and then you can use the stalk as like a tiny little crib to hold the
Right.
fruit. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's probably the best. Might still be the best way to peel a banana, and I do it the other way around as well, right? but I like the analogy even more, because what you're describing with the low hanging fruit is something that we see as well when we deploy data analytics projects, right? Because I think with the jumping to another tree because you're not comfortable enough to climb higher is something that we see as well when we do these projects, and then expect people to use these analytics tools to get to the bottom of things. And then what you see them do is right click and export to Excel and go the
Right,
very own
yeah.
way that they
Yeah.
know, right?
Well, that's what they do. Anthony Dayton, who used to be CTO at Click when I was there, he used to say that every time somebody exports to Excel, an angel loses its wings. And of course, what we mean there by that is that when somebody does that, you've now lost any kind of governance or control or insight of what they're doing. All sorts of crazy things can happen once you export to Excel. And so the idea should be to build tools that don't need people to do that, that they can actually do the work they need to do. And the low-hanging fruit thing is super interesting. If you think of how you use Google, and I think Google is always a very interesting example of how technologies have developed from technologies that were about queries to technologies that are about browsing. Back in the old days of the internet, if you wanted to search for something and you used Alta Vista or Lycos or something, you used queries. You use the plus sign and the minus sign and parentheses and inverted commas and all sorts of things to make and quote marks, in order to construct a query. And you would write the and operator, the or operator, the not operator, in order to basically construct a query to search the web. And Google, you don't do that anymore. You just search. You just enter your search terms, and it returns a lot of information, more information you can handle, returns it very quickly. But also it returns it in a way that's easy to browse, and you get a really good sense of the information. I don't know many people who do a Google search and then they click on every link, carefully evaluating every option. What they do is they pick 2 or 3 and they click on them, and very quickly they decide whether they're interesting or not, based on what Peter Paroli calls information sent. Well, in business intelligence, we do the same. What reports are we looking for? We decide very quickly, we click on them. If we don't see what we're looking for, if we don't get the clues, if we don't get the information sent, that here is something interesting and useful, what I call glimpsing, we don't glimpse that information, then we move on very quickly to something else. And so, as designers, it's a design problem. It's a visual design problem, but it's also an information design problem. How do we give people the information in a way that they can evaluate it quickly and then decide whether it's something they want to dig into in more detail, if they want to peel the banana, or if they just want to move on quickly and find something else?
Yeah. From my opinion, what I see in practice with many consultants here in the Netherlands, that they just build graphs and tables because they can build the graphs and tables, and they don't look exactly to the information needs which is possible to get your goals, to gain your goals for an organization. We just build because we can build. And from my opinion, that should be more focused to your organizational goals. Do you agree also with that?
I do. I remember when we spoke a long time ago when I joined Click, and we were designing, starting to think about the design of Clicksense and what was needed to design Clicksense. And of course, we were asking experts, including yourself, about your ideas. But one of the things we did was looked at very simple information like log files from customers who were willing to share their log files with us so we could see what people were doing. And you know what we found? We found that there were hundreds of reports, hundreds of visualizations, hundreds of tabs within documents, which were never looked at. People had spent quite a lot of time designing them and nobody ever looked at them. Because what they'd really done was just build a ton of stuff because they could, rather than actually really trying to answer the business questions. And one of the things we forget about, when I've been in the business for a long time, long before we started calling it business intelligence, back when I was young, we talked about decision support. Remember that phrase, decision support systems? And it's a much better name than business intelligence because it tells you what the technology does. It supports you in making decisions. And business intelligence is just a marketing term and it doesn't really mean anything. But what's really interesting to me about decision support is that once you know what decisions people want to make, then you can ensure that they have the right information. If you're talking about business intelligence, you give them the information and then hope they can make a decision. But it's not driven by an understanding of the decision that people are making. It's driven by what you can design in. So you think, well, I can design this really cool dashboard. I can design this really cool graphic. I can put in this visualization. But we should really be starting our design process from the other way, which is what are people going to do with this? What decisions are they going to make? And therefore, what information do they need? And therefore, what format should I be showing it in to support them in making their decision? And if you do that, then you actually build information systems which are fantastically useful, but they can also be beautiful and engaging as well.
The questions that I'm asking me or myself in that context isn't the world changing a little bit towards where you cannot really anticipate the decisions and questions that people are going to try and answer with the instruments at hand. You know what where I'm getting is like
Yeah,
the old like self-service versus guided analytics stigma, let's call it, right? And
yeah.
when we look at the way that the world works today, I mean, this is also just phrases in a way, but the I think that we're moving way faster than being able to provide people with like a already built analytic solutions that will, or decision support solutions that will serve them in every like aspect of their everyday lives, right? So, and this is also
Right.
probably why we're speaking about like data literacy these days, right? Because at some point, I think it's not feasible for every like party in a business to really every decision that they make every day to go ahead and crawl for the data, put together like a data model, then build some visualizations on it. All right, so that's my revenue, grand. Move on, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I guess, but I think we're moving towards a world where we should get people to a point where when they come across a decision that they need to make or some information that they require to support a decision that they're going to make, where they feel comfortable to get active themselves rather than
Mm.
and I think this is something very valuable that what you're saying is right, because you're saying it's about lowering barriers and engaging people in a way. So in your experience, what's required to tickle like their curiosity and their like inner data designers?
Well, I think we need to go back to this idea of supporting decisions and your very good point about not being able to predict questions. When you design a dashboard or you design an application, you design it for a purpose, and that purpose is to help people make decisions. So the initial design has to support this decision making. But you're right, what we don't know is what questions will arise in that process. And when I was at Click, for example, we often talked about the next question, enabling the next question. And this is something I still talk about with other vendors all the time. It's not just about being able to answer a question, but being able to answer the next question and raise another question. And this is really why self-service developed. It's why we developed, when I was at Microsoft, and we developed Power Pivot, which was an add-in to Excel, which later became Power BI. It's when at Click we created the Click View platform, which was really one of the very first self-service platforms, why we increased its self-service capabilities in Clicksense. Because you can't anticipate every question somebody's going to answer, you need to enable them to do some questioning as well, and if necessary, to build some artifacts, some reports or dashboards or analyses themselves. So it's very important to give people those capabilities. And as the world changes very quickly, and as our business models change, and we've seen, of course, this year very dramatically in 2020, that our business world can change more dramatically perhaps than any of us thought. We need to be able to respond to that, and self-service gives us that ability to respond. If you look at the history of business intelligence, of data decision support and data warehousing, for example, at every major crisis, ranging from the oil crisis in the 1990s through the dot-com crash in 2000, through the financial crisis in 2008, now in COVID, every single one of these crises has actually brought in a new generation of decision-making tools which were more adaptable, more agile, and easier for business users to use directly. First, it was a data warehouse, then it was business intelligence, then it was self-service business intelligence. And now we're seeing emerging automated machine learning, natural language processing, all things which enable business users to use the product more efficiently, but all the time enabling them very directly to ask this next question. So it's a really exciting time. I mean, crises are very difficult, but they're also very exciting because new technologies emerge from that. And what we're seeing is this new generation of very agile, even more self-service than self-service technologies.
Yeah, but not but and technologies are just like a part of the equation, right? So if we want to get from data to decisions, you need to have like the right I mean, I hate the term, but tools to get where you want to go. But then on the other hand, you need to have someone who's using that tool, right? So
Well, that's right. You need to have the curious person who can make who can ask the next question. And I think that's one of the skills that we need to be looking at and hiring for. I'm going to put this a little bit differently, actually. We need people with a set of skills who can ask those questions. We also need people with a set of attitudes, mindsets, backgrounds. It's one of the reasons I'm very, very keen on building workforces which are very diverse. To me, that's not just a matter of basic justice. It's actually also a much better environment for exploration and decision making, because there's such a wide variety of views. One of my great pleasures in working has been working with people from so many different backgrounds. And one of the things I get from that is just a remarkable diversity of opinion. And if everybody's got the same background, they're typically going to explore the same subjects. But when people come from very diverse backgrounds, they can ask new questions that I might not even think of.
Yeah, that's what I love when I in my classrooms. And I still teach at the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam. And if I have a group with this little bit older people versus the younger people, I see sometimes fantastic things by the youngsters that I not even thought about when I use Clicksense to let them build dashboards for the milkshake bar, which is incredible. They build like a handshake, they build an extension. It's unbelievable. And I love that. That's how they enforce each other, the elderly and the youngsters in my classrooms. It's very, very interesting opinion. And I truly believe that if you have teams, you should have a big diversity in your team, because it enforces each other. Yeah.
Experience is very much works in two ways. I mean, experience, we tend to think of experience as being a good thing. That's a very experienced person, therefore they'll be better. But actually naivety and not knowing and coming to things with a fresh mind can be very, very creative as well.
Absolutely.
And, I think we need more naivety and curiosity, even more than we need experience.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, so it's like an open-mindedness in combination with like an inquisitive, and I think what you said is actually quite interesting, because you said that like the wanting to use data and analytics to help yourself like amplify decisions or support decisions in your life is not actually a skill set, it's a mindset. And I think this is absolutely fundamental, right? Because I've always felt that data literacy, or like training in data literacy, which is the term that we've come to use or to become acquainted or comfortable with using when we're talking about people being competent when using data, right? So they want to, they understand how to represent data, how data behaves, how you can model data and all these things, and they're comfortable with approaching data. But buying a tool and buying training in how to use the tool and how to approach data is still not enough, right? Because you're still buying another tool. If you're in creating like a data literacy program, it's more about transforming the culture and the way that you approach decisions and how you embed using data to form decisions and overrule the experience and therefore bias that you sometimes face, right?
Yes.
So what's the what was the successful approaches that you've seen to realizing something, a cultural transformation like that?
So I think data literacy is an interesting term, and I've spent a lot of time discussing it with Jordan Morrow, for example, at Click, who's super interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that I think we need to make a distinction with is literacy as a personal capability. I'm literate, and literacy as an organization or a social capability. The example I like to give here sometimes is I sometimes start presentations on data literacy by saying that when I was in Scotland, I spent a lot of time in prison, which is true. But I wasn't a prisoner; I was a volunteer working on an adult literacy program, helping people with their studies in reading and writing and numeracy, learning, basic arithmetic skills. Because in our Western societies, which are highly literate, 98, 99% literate, if you're one of that 1% or 2% who are illiterate, you're at a tremendous disadvantage, to the extent that, very often you do end up in prison because you can't get a job, you can't get housing, you can't, all these things that we use to in our society, to run our society. So you end up dropping out the bottom of society, and it's kind of tragic. And if you can turn that around, you can make a remarkable difference in your life. And I found that very satisfying to volunteer in these programs with these remarkable men who were turning their lives around. But I also do a lot of work now with an Indian nonprofit called Pratham, which specializes in literacy and numeracy studies in India, where there's a very large number, not a small percentage, but a very large percentage of people who are illiterate and still struggling with education. And that's very different, because what you're doing there is taking a society which is not literate enough and transforming it into a more literate society. And so I often make the case that data literacy, if we think about it as a personal skill, we're missing out the fact that it should really be an organizational skill. Literacy, after all, is actually about communication. It's the ability of me to express to you what I want and what I'm doing, and for you to express to me what you want and what you're doing. It always involves a two-way communication. And so the idea that it's about a skill that I have, if I have the skill and nobody else has it, then all I'm really doing is talking to myself. So if we can raise the level of literacy, even just a little bit in an organization, we have a greater impact than just one or two people being extremely data literate. In other words, I would rather see an organization where everybody was better at using Excel and BI than having an organization where one or two people were fantastic data scientists. And so that's really how I think about literacy. It's about an organizational capability, but building a community of practice who are able to share ideas and use data as a way of informing each other, rather than just having one or two people who form a center of excellence, or sometimes a center of arrogance around their skills. I want to see a community skill. That's really how I think about it.
So with your experience, what do you think are the greatest obstacles that you need to overcome when you're trying to bring your company culture, your community towards being more data literate, being more savvy when it comes to using data to communicate?
Well, I think there are 4 obstacles to be overcome. And I say those 4 because I've been thinking about this fairly carefully over the years, and recently with a couple of projects that I've done, these 4 have really stood out. The first one is people need availability of data and tools. In other words, they need access to the information to work with. And that turns out to be a big barrier in a lot of organizations. People just don't have the data. They don't have the information. So then they have to go to specialists in order to get it. So they're not being provisioned with data and tools that they can use. And the tools don't need to be any more sophisticated than Excel, but it's great if they are. It's great if they have tools which are actually simpler and at the same time more purposeful than Excel. So if they have business intelligence tools like Click. So they need data and tools to work with. That's the first barrier. The second barrier is they actually need to make data-driven decisions. In other words, people have to take data seriously in an organization. And a lot of times you'll see organizations which are really running on gut instinct and gut feeling. And although they might have a lot of charts and graphs, we were just saying earlier how often these aren't actually looked at and used in the decision-making. So it has to be a conscious effort to use data. And that comes from the third barrier, which is that executives, leaders in the organization have to use data in their communications, in their personal decision-making, and in their work with the rest of the organization. Data has to be part of the lifeblood of their business. And I see businesses which say, oh yes, we want to be data-driven, but the executives themselves aren't using data. They're not sitting down and using information. They're not using dashboards. And when they communicate back to their teams, when they send their quarterly update or whatever, there's not a lot of data in there. There's a lot of story, but there's not a lot of data. And therefore, they're not really living what they claim they want the business to be, a data-driven business. which leads to the fourth problem, which is that far too often there are experts, and sometimes these are in IT, and sometimes these are experts in business, who want to kind of create a data silo. They want to hoard the data. They want to keep the skills as specialized skills. And you see that in business quite a lot, this kind of people staking out their territory. So these kind of four things: we need to make data and tools available. We need to actually use them and have communications which are driven by data. That needs to come from executives who need to lead from the top in being data literate and in using data in their communications. And we need to break down these barriers between specialists and non-specialists and start thinking more in organizational terms rather than in terms of personal skills.
Fully agree. Nothing to add at it. Exactly. How can you be successful as an organization if your management or your executives are not working with data and insights created from data?
Right.
If they don't, they have to be the leading examples, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, they're the
they
hippo,
really do.
right?
Yeah.
And I can see examples. I see examples today, and I've seen examples in the past of business intelligence teams, organizations, business intelligence vendors who don't use data extensively internally or in their communications. I've seen, business intelligence vendors talk about, maybe a disappointing quarter or a successful quarter or an acquisition or a round of cuts, as so often happens in business. And yet data is not part of their communication. They give people, really empty, bland corporate responses about why this has happened or why they're doing these things, but they're not giving them data, and they're not, they're not talking to people in language that they want to understand. So I'm actually very disappointed in the way that a lot of business talks about being data driven, but then never really is.
How do you where do you like make the cut between becoming like more data driven? So I think it's it's something where we need to like make a distinction between we're just using graphs as like a decoration for our like monthly reports, and then actually looking into them and, like you said, asking the next question, right? So where would you say like is the breaking point where you become from like a graph oriented towards being a more like data driven organization?
Well, it really comes down to these two things that we discussed earlier. What are the decisions you're making? Is the information you're giving people actually related to the decisions that you are going to make or were made in the past? So if I'm giving a report about something that was done, am I actually showing people the information that is relevant to that decision? And did we actually use that information? And am I explaining what information was used and how we used it? If so, then we're getting close to being data driven. And then the other thing is, are we giving the capability of asking the next question?
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes, in a report, you might not be able to give that ability to ask the next question. But in an internal system, which is designed to be interactive, you absolutely should.
Okay, and then so if you're trying to transform your workforce, right? Because this is something that we've been talking about, right? So you're probably not going to replace your work. Hopefully, you're not going to replace your workforce, but can everybody learn these skills and become a person like that? So you've been in the business for a while now, and I think you've seen quite an evolution of like the way that the information is transported to people. I think we like all handle technology differently, but all on a similar level. But what's your experience? How do you get people to embrace these ideas?
One of the great things about the human mind is that we are all extremely analytic. We actually know how to do analysis. Almost anyone can do cluster analysis and discover patterns and shapes. Almost anyone can find outliers if the information is presented to them in the right way. If the information is presented to people in a way that works with their intelligence and understanding. If people have to learn your process in order to work with your information, then you're creating a barrier. If people, on the other hand, can work with your process naturally because you've taken the trouble to design the information architecture and to design the information analysis in a way that they can understand, then they'll work with it quite happily. So I think we have to do the work. But people often think of it as we need to train our workforce. Actually, I think it's the other way around. We need to meet our workforce where they are with their existing natural human skills and understanding. You know, the example I love to give of this is if you look at apps that you buy on the iPhone, look at sleep trackers or look at exercise trackers and fitness trackers. They give you a lot of data. They give you a lot of information. Nobody needs to go on a training course to learn how to use these. At the very most, you might kind of flick through a few help screens or beginning. You can look at a beautiful game like Monument Valley, very successful game that was actually designed by a design company in Sweden and London who worked with us on the basic design of Clicksense. And Monument Valley has no rules. There's no page of instructions. You just sit down and you start playing. And as you play it, you learn how the game works as you play through it. We can build these very complicated information systems when we put our minds to it and help people explore them using our natural skills. It is easier, it's lazier, it's more boring and less engaging to say we need to train our users to use our system, because that saves you the effort of designing a system that they can use. And the people who've done a really good job in business intelligence have been the ones who have actually, rather than expecting their users to learn their process, have taken that step forward and met the users where they are and developed a process that the users can engage with.
It's a huge part of that first obstacle that you've mentioned, right? The access and because this is like the approachability. Is that a word? And the simplicity.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Yeah.
Of how you can like engage with these challenges or these results that you're expecting from these things. Yeah, that's a really excellent point. Yeah, and I like the empathic approach. That you say, I'm not trying to make you adapt to these new ideas, but I'm trying to understand how you live your life and do your work every day, and then you go ahead, because this is something that we see as well, right? So you have these, you approach these people. Again, it's like experience that I've had when I did these projects. So you tell them, yeah, listen, I'm not like a very tech savvy person. I've got the iPhone 5 and it's already 2018, I don't know, and all these things, right? And then suddenly these people have to take care of configuring their new company car, and suddenly they're turning into, I don't know, some sort of like technical magic person who can totally identify which tax model with which package will lead to the ultimate gain. And so this is totally something that you've described now. So I think people have this in themselves, right? Optimizing their route for their travels using TripAdvisor, Google Maps, and all these things, and then they just need to translate this into the world that they're living in every day.
So the information needs to be fit for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fit for them. And I remember when we had the discussion about Clicksense and ClickView and how we used it at UWV, Donald. I was always talking about that everybody should have access to the information that we were creating. Even the transparency in my project management hours versus planning and budget, all this kind of things should be available for all of my customers that are where I was doing the projects for. And somebody else told me, one of my managers, by the way, he said, but you are very transparent. But actually, that's something that Donald taught me. BI is for everyone and needs to be for everyone. Otherwise, it will not be successful. Never.
One of the, I should say that when we were designing Clicksense, we had a brilliant design team of really expert designers led by Murray Griggle McMahon. And he really was outstanding. I know you probably met Murray several times. And in addition to, for example, hiring outside design consultants like us two who designed Monument Valley and helped with some of the concepts in Clicksense, and bringing in Indy Young, who is a fantastic design mentor who helps to train people in subjects like empathy and understanding, using empathetic listening to understand users and to create mind maps of their system. And they did unusual things, sometimes which raised a few eyebrows, and people couldn't quite relate to them sometimes. So for example, the design team went to a skate park and they watch people skateboarding at a skate park in Lund or maybe in Malmo. And when they were watching people skating, they observed how people interact and how people use the design park as a system. They think of the design park, the skate park, as a system. And what they discovered were some very important things. For example, there are experts who use every part of the park, and they're doing their tricks and doing their performances. There are also areas between each jump and between each kind of slide, or whatever they call them, where people can pause, where people can stop and see what's going on. They can observe. And one of the things they do is they observe other people. So the beginners will do the simple stuff, and then they'll stop on a platform and they'll observe the experts, and then they might try it. And once you started thinking about the skate park, not just as something where one person goes and skates, but think of it as where a community of skaters come together to explore a system, then you learn a great deal from the skate park about how design enables that interaction, and how design enables that observation, and how design enables experts to do the expert thing, and beginners to do the beginner thing, but also know where they are and orient themselves in the system and understand what they can do next. And it turned out, yes, it was an abstract exercise, but it turned out to be a very valuable exercise in getting us into that mindset. Not just a technical approach, but the mindset of thinking of a community of users exploring a system.
Yeah. I remember that completely. That was fantastic. that period, and I remember when the first parts came out, and I was so uber excited. And then it became, of course, Clicksense version 1, and I started immediately in using it in my classroom, because it had a low, how do you call it, a low entrance path, right?
Right.
Because
yeah.
everybody could use it, and that was exactly the goal. If you were mature enough to build fantastic correlations and bubble charts, okay, but it was also very, very cool just to do the basic stuff and get that decision making in their minds. So that's really cool. Yeah. And
it was a
it has been
fascinating period.
Yeah, and it was a fantastic journey. I only have a small part with me, of course, but from what I have seen then and what I see now, there is a big difference. But I also seen Power BI grow and evolve to the heights where it's now, and even Tableau. I think it's really neat in how it works, and you can do actually fantastic visualizations with it. So I don't believe there is a bad tool anymore. It's just you have to choose something.
And I think
you do. One of the things that was great about the Clicksense Journey was working with people like yourself who were enthusiastic about the product. They understood the problem space very well, and were also able to take it out to other people. And we learned so much from that process. But I think you're right. If I look at the what would you call it, the Gartner Magic Quadrant, or the BARC survey, or the Forrester Wave, or any of those kind of industry surveys that look at all the tools on the market, every tool has a purpose. Every tool has an audience. Every tool has some benefit to people, and many tools are. Most tools are just basically competent. There's no bad tool on the market, like you say, but everybody has their niche and their speciality, and very often that's got nothing to do with the technical capabilities of the tool. I've often said I've never seen a project fail on technical reasons. I've often seen projects fail because there was a difference in expectations between the users and what the technology was capable of. I've seen projects fail because of a breakdown in relationships between the vendor or the partner and the customer, and I've seen projects fail because expectations were wrongly set. But projects failing on technical grounds doesn't really happen. When I was working at Microsoft, I had a customer and I was working on Microsoft's ETL product, integration services, and we had a customer who said, we'll never buy this product because it doesn't do fast loading into Oracle, and enterprise products need to do fast loading into Oracle. And this costs us, we would love to use your product, but we're spending $400,000 a year on essential data stage. I wish I could save that money by using your product, but I can't because you don't do fast loading into Oracle. And I was saying, well, you know, there is a way you can drop data out into this raw file format, and then you can use Oracle's native fast loader and you can do it. And they said, well, that's just a really clunky, unacceptable solution for enterprise. Anyway, that was kind of bad experience. They complained to the design team. They complained to the bosses of the design team. They complained to Steve Ballmer, you know. Anyway, that was one meeting in exactly the same building. I left that meeting, went to an elevator, went to another company in the same business who used the same IBM mainframe software, loading into a very similar data warehouse, also on Oracle. And they said, oh, you know, we love integration services. And I said, well, what about, you know, the lack of an Oracle fast loader? Oh, we don't need that. You know, we just drop the data to a raw file, and then we use Oracle's fast loading capability. And we like doing it that way because it gives us a checkpoint along the way where if we need to roll back to that, we've got the raw data, and we've saved $500,000 a year on Informatica, which we used to spend, and now we don't need to spend that, and we just love this software. And that was exactly the same business problem, almost exactly the same architecture, and two completely different answers.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Neither of those answers really had to do with the technical capabilities of the product. They had to do with the expectations of the users, and the disappointment and the success could have been swapped around easily if expectations and relationships between the vendor and the sense of kind of personal direction, if you like, that people had been different. The people had different purposes. So I learned a lot from that, which is, you know, not to get hung up on the technicalities, but to get hung up on the human aspects of this.
That's what you taught me so many years ago, dear Donald. And I took that in my backpack with me in my journey in making BI important for the internal environment of the UWV. And it worked. It really worked. Right. And because BI was at the heart, actually, at that moment for a lot of people, because my phrase was, BI is for everyone.
Right, yeah.
BI is for everyone. We often make the mistake by saying, okay, you buy 10 licenses and then you will give it to the executive, the manager layer, and the rest not necessary. But it's actually necessary because decision making needs to be at the lowest level of an organization as well. That's
and it's a very human process.
It's a very human process. And
it's
that's
not
what
a technical process at all. No.
Exactly. That's what you taught me then, and I still carry that with me all the way.
That's wonderful.
That's how I work. Yeah. Okay, cool. So do you have a question more, dear Boris? Because you are listening.
I'm listening and I'm learning and I like it.
Yeah, cool. So thanks. I think we are already 45 minutes on the road, or
oh, are we? Oh my
minutes.
Goodness.
Yeah. So and it's your day has just started. I think of a few hours, right? And ours is ending.
Well, you need to go to bed and I need to get lunch. So we're both motivated to wrap up.
That's a pretty good idea.
So a wrap up. Thank you. The human impact is very important for all organizations. BI is for everybody. That's the main key, I think. Or how would you summarize it?
I would. It's all, you know, the human element, all the work that we do supports the human element. And when the human element comes together, great things happen. And let's face it, great friendships emerge as well. And that's been a very important part of this call for me as well, catching up with you.
Yeah, cool. I'm so grateful and that you are here and in our living room, and that you were willing to talk with us about data literacy. I know it's a marketing phrase, but the concept behind it is the human impact that we can achieve by just talking about it, and let people look at the movies that we make and the blogs that we write about things that organizations need to have this transformation.
That is absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much, and hi to your wife, I think you became grandfather a few years ago.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. You made some very nice socks, I think, for your grandchild.
Or
a hat or something. And I really hope and pray that we will see each other next year. But
I hope so, yeah.
We have to wait. No, it's enough.
Donald, it's really
Thank
great
you very
meeting
much.
you.
Really nice to meet you, Boris. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and speak soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, my friends.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.